boys and girls. So we're going to start a new domain today. It's Domain 12, Lesson 1. It's titled Fighting for a Cause. Throughout history, people have had to stand up and demand that they be treated fairly. They have fought for equal rights for themselves and for others. You have to be very brave to stand up for what you believe in. Over the next couple of weeks, you will find out about 7 people who took a stand against inequality and demanded certain rights. You will discover that most of these people lived a long time ago, but what they achieved affects us today. They made the world a much fairer place. They fought for equal rights for everyone. And equal rights just means that everybody is treated the same way. So it doesn't matter the color of your skin, that you are able to do the same thing as somebody else. And inequality is where people of different skin color were treated badly and differently than the white people. One of the types or categories of or rights people have is called civil rights. And civil rights are those rights the government gives to people. Civil rights in the United States include freedom of speech, the right to vote, and protection from discrimination. So what that means is that when we're born, we have the freedom of speech, which means we can say what we want to say. We have the right to vote, of course, when you're 18 or older, and protection from discrimination. And discrimination is when a person of a different color besides white can't do something that the same thing that a white person can do. So that's not allowed. So or vice versa. It could be where a black person does something or an Asian person can do something, but you as a white person can't. Civil rights also include the right to be treated equally under the law. Different countries have different ideas about civil rights. But the people you hear about in this domain all lived in the United States. So you will learn about civil rights and other rights people have in this country. Many of the people in the stories that follow had to fight for some of the rights we now take for granted. However, these people didn't fight with violence. They fought with words and with peaceful actions. As a result, they changed the world for the better. For a very long time, people weren't protected by any rights at all. For hundreds, even thousands of years, people were at the mercy of those in charge. And those in charge were people like kings, monarchs. They basically told you what to do. Monarchs, such as kings, military leaders, or tribal leaders, governed with an iron fist. What that means is they told you what to do, and if you didn't like it, then there would be consequences that you wouldn't like. Over time, people began to demand some rights. They wanted to select their leaders. They wanted to vote. They wanted to own property. And they wanted the right to practice a religion the way they wanted to. Eventually, monarchs changed their ways, or the kings, or they were replaced by elected governments. Gradually, governments started giving people civil rights, which meant that people would be treated more fairly. And remember, the government gives you the civil rights. You're born with those rights, which are freedom of speech, the right to vote, and discrimination. You can't be discriminated against. Otherwise, there will be consequences for the person who is discriminating you. The U.S. government has made this promise to treat people more fairly. Sadly, when governments do not guarantee rights, people face great difficulties. Often, the most basic human needs, such as enough food to eat, a safe place to live, and a good education and job, are denied. We should never forget how lucky we are to live in a country that cares about people and their rights. Even in the United States, however, the government and some more powerful groups of people have not always treated everyone fairly and equally, and they kept certain groups of people from having the same rights. Some very brave people have fought to change this. So basically why this is important, guys, is because in other countries, besides the U.S., they don't have the freedom of speech. They don't have the right to vote. They don't have discrimination, the right against discrimination. So basically in other countries, they were told what they could do, what they can't do. They were told where they had to live. They were told what to eat. They were told what kind of job they would have. Where we have these freedoms that we can choose in the United States of where we want to live and what job we want to have when we get older. So for a very long time in many parts of the world, women did not have the right to vote. Even in the United States, it wasn't until the 1920s that all women were granted or given the right to vote. And this change to the law happened after women protested, marched, and campaigned for this right. Until the mid-1860s in parts of the United States, many African Americans were slaves. Remember what a slave is? A slave is somebody who has to do work without getting paid. So again, they're told what to do. Even after slavery was abolished or it ended, in some states, African Americans did not have the same legal rights as white people and were not treated equally. So this is where the inequality comes in, guys. African Americans are black people. They didn't have the same rights or things to do like the white people could because they were not treated fairly or equally. In the South, for example, African Americans were not allowed to attend certain schools or eat at certain restaurants. Barriers were also placed in their way when African Americans tried to vote. In this domain, you will learn about two people who helped defeat or end this inequality. With their supporters, they marched, campaigned, and demanded equal rights under the law until finally, in 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. And this act removed unfair laws by prohibiting or ending discrimination. The following year, the Voting Rights Act removed all voting barriers for African Americans. This means that African Americans would be allowed to vote just like all Americans without facing discrimination. Throughout the history of this country, there have been certain people dedicated to making sure that all citizens have the civil rights they deserve. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, who wrote the words, "All men are created equal," meaning that everybody is treated the same. He wrote those words a very long time ago in a document called the Declaration of Independence. This is an example of the Declaration of Independence. This document was a letter of protest against the unfair treatment of the colonists by the British. The colonists fought for their rights and freedoms and founded a new nation, the United States of America. In this domain, you will find out about 7 individuals who, like Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers, stood up for what they believed in. Here's a quick introduction and a summary of the achievement for which each is known. So here's Susan B. Anthony. She thought that women should have the same educational and employment opportunities as men, because back then women couldn't do what men could do. Susan believed that women should be allowed to vote. She dedicated her whole life to making the world a fairer place for women. This is Eleanor Roosevelt. She worked to improve the quality of life for many groups of people, but especially for children, women, Native Americans, and African Americans. She was concerned about the fact that girls did not have the same educational opportunities as boys and that far too many African Americans lived in poverty. She traveled all over the United States and talked to the poor and needy. She encouraged her husband, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to make changes that would reduce poverty and let everyone live a better life. This is Mary McLeod Bethune. She worked to create educational opportunities for African American girls during the time when there were separate schools for children of different skin color. She started a school in Florida that later became a college. Some people in her community did not like what she was doing and tried to stop her. They bullied her, but she would not give up. Eventually, Mary became so successful that several U.S. presidents sought her advice on how to make this country a fairer place for all. It's pretty spectacular that the presidents reached out to her and asked her how could she help the country become a fairer place. This is Jackie Robinson. He was bright, well-educated, and a terrific athlete. He became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. When Jackie first began playing Major League Baseball, some of his fellow team members and fans treated him badly. Jackie Robinson did not give up. Because of his courage and talent, he changed people's attitudes or their views about things. This is Rosa Parks. On a cold December evening many years ago, an African-American woman named Rosa Parks sat on a crowded bus. When the bus driver asked her to give up her seat to a white man who did not have a seat, she refused. She found the courage to say no. After Rosa was arrested, people came together and decided that they wouldn't ride the Montgomery City buses until everyone had the same rights as white people. This was the beginning of the civil rights movement that challenged unfair laws in the South. And we know this guy, Martin Luther King Jr. He's perhaps the most famous member of the civil rights movement. He believed in bringing about change through nonviolence. Nonviolence meaning you do not use your fists, you do not use weapons, you only use your words. In 1965, nearly one-half of African Americans lived in poverty, and many experienced discrimination every day. Because of Martin's leadership, the civil rights movement forced change and helped to create opportunities for many people who had experienced discrimination. It became against the law to discriminate against someone because of race, color, religion, or the country in which they were born. This is Cesar Chavez. He knew firsthand about how hard it was to be a farm worker who had to travel from farm to farm. He knew that farm workers who did this type of work earned very little money for the hard work that they did. In 1962, Cesar and his friend organized thousands of farm workers into a group called a union. Because so many people came together as part of this union and demanded change, Cesar found a way to improve the lives of all farm workers. The people you will learn about had courage. They were very brave. Sometimes they were bullied or threatened, but this did not stop them from doing what they knew was right. As you hear these stories, think about how different life was all those years ago when these people set out to make the world a better place. All right, boys and girls. So now after you're done listening to the story, I want you to go ahead and answer the question below. Have a good day. Bye.